Tarantino always says the 70s were the greatest decade for cinema, but that doesn't mean he ignored the 60s. Turns out he's got some pretty wild picks from the decade before his favorite era, like what he calls the coolest gangster movie ever made, a western so violent it got banned for 30 years, and a wife-swapping comedy he straight up called the best sex comedy Hollywood ever pulled off. This one's directed by Jean-Pierre Melville, and it's the kind of movie where you don't fully understand what the hell's going on for the first hour, but you're still totally locked in. The plot follows a recently released burglar who takes out an old associate, then starts plotting a new job with a friend he's not sure he can trust. Tarantino absolutely loves this movie. He once said it might be his favorite screenplay of all time, just from watching the film. He talked about how, even though the story keeps you in the dark for most of the runtime, it still pulls you in emotionally. I just love the wildness of watching a movie that, up until the last 20 minutes, I didn't know what the fuck it was I was looking at, and the last 20 minutes explained it all. And he's not alone. Scorsese also backed this movie, calling Melville one of the great masters of the genre. He said his gangsters and cops follow a strict code, like knights in a world that's already fallen apart. And this one might just be Scorsese's personal favorite. You can feel Django's fingerprints all over Django Unchained. Tarantino was never shy about where the idea came from. Directed by Sergio Corbucci, Django is one of the most brutal, cynical, and flat-out insane spaghetti westerns ever made. It kicks off with Django, played by Franco Nero, dragging a coffin through the mud into a ghost town. Inside the coffin is a machine gun. He rescues a prostitute from a hanging, then gets caught between Mexican bandits and a racist gang. This film was banned in the UK for almost 30 years because of the violence. And one particular scene where a guy gets his ear sliced off, Tarantino directly lifted that for Reservoir Dogs. Of course, Django Unchained brings it all full circle. It opens with the theme song from Django, and Franco Nero himself even pops up in a cameo, because Tarantino's nothing if not loyal to his influences.
What's your name?
Django.
Can you spell it?
D-J-A-N-G-O. The D is silent.
I know.
This one's more of a deep cut, but if you know Kill Bill, you've already heard Twisted Nerve. That whistle L Driver does while walking down the hospital hallway, straight out of this movie.
Here, got any change, mate? And the best of British luck to you, too.
Tarantino actually reused the music multiple times. It's Rosario Dawson's ringtone in Death Proof 2. Twisted Nerve is a psychological thriller about a young man, Martin, who pretends to be intellectually disabled so he can get close to a woman named Susan. He becomes obsessed with her and starts killing anyone he sees as getting in the way. It's not a slasher, even though it was kind of marketed like one. It's more of a slow-burn psychological creep fest. The violence is minimal, but when it hits hard. Tarantino first screened it at the QT Fest in Austin back in '97, and apparently by the end of it, the entire audience was whistling the theme tune by heart. The movie also had some unexpected fans. Hitchcock himself saw it and was so impressed with the cast that he brought two of the actors, Barry Foster and Billy Whitelaw, into his next film, Frenzy. Steve McQueen barely says a word here, and still somehow owns every single frame he's in. This is the one where he plays a cop guarding a mob witness. But of course, things go sideways fast, and McQueen has to start bending rules just to keep the case from falling apart. Robert Vaughn, who plays the politician, later said this was the best work he ever did, and the one performance he was proudest of. Which is kind of funny, because when he first read the script, he hated it. Said it didn't have a plot. McQueen had to twist his arm just to get him to sign on. Eventually, the studio threw so much money at him, he gave in. Tarantino talks about this movie in his book Cinema Speculation, how McQueen barely does anything in this role and still somehow pulls off more than most actors could dream of. He even says this is the role McQueen should be remembered for, because it shows what he could do that Newman and Beatty couldn't, which, in Tarantino's words, is just B. We already know Tarantino's got a soft spot for Jean-Pierre Melville, and Le Samouraï is one of his all-time favorites. Alain Delon plays Jeff Costello, a French hitman who lives by his own rules. He kills a nightclub owner, but someone sees him. So now the cops are after him, and so are his own bosses. It's been called one of the most influential crime films ever made, and that's not hype. It's on Roger Ebert's great movies list. Scorsese, Fincher, the Coens, all of them have pulled from this. And Tarantino's obsessed with Melville's whole approach. He said Melville made the coolest gangster films ever, and he even calls him one of the greatest reconstructionists of genre, right up there with Sergio Leone. What he would do is he would take these Bogart-Cagney gangster films that he loved so much, take them from Warner Brothers and basically almost redo them verbatim. But he would set them in Paris and Marseille, and that changed everything. You can't talk about Tarantino's favorite 60s movies without mentioning The Great Escape. This one's pure classic cinema. Steve McQueen again, this time as a rebellious prisoner plotting a mass breakout during World War II. It's a fictionalized version of real events, and it's absolutely Hollywoodized. But there are real details baked into it. The Tunnel King Wally Floody actually worked as a full-time consultant on the film for over a year, and a bunch of the actors were former prisoners of war themselves. Donald Pleasance had been held in a German camp, Hannes Messimer in a Russian one, and Hans Reiser had been captured by Americans. Tarantino loves this movie so much he said it became kind of a personal tradition for him, like the movie version of Christmas. And in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, he even slips in a little tribute. Rick Dalton, played by DiCaprio, is shown reimagined as McQueen's character in The Great Escape, complete with that same iconic scene. So this one's technically a crime thriller, but what Peter Bogdanovich pulled off here is way more interesting than just that. Targets follows two storylines, one about a young guy who seems completely normal until he suddenly snaps and goes on a killing spree, and the other about an aging horror movie actor, played by Boris Karloff, which is just amazing casting, who's thinking about retiring. Now here's where it gets wild. Roger Corman gave Bogdanovich a deal. He told him, make whatever movie you want, as long as you use some stock footage from The Terror and shoot with Karloff for 2 days, because Karloff still owed Corman those two. But Karloff read the script and loved it so much, he refused to take any money for extra days. He was only supposed to shoot for 2 days. He worked 5 for free. And this was when Karloff was in really bad shape. 80 years old, barely able to walk, on oxygen between takes, using a cane just to stand. But he pushed through because he believed in the movie. And he lived long enough to see it finished, and to hear people call his performance one of his best. Tarantino straight up called it one of the most powerful films of the 60s and one of the greatest directorial debuts of all time. He said after all these years, it's still one of the strongest cries for gun control in American cinema. This is the movie Sharon Tate is watching in the cinema during Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. That wasn't just a random pick. Tarantino loves this movie. It's part of the Matt Helm series. Dean Martin plays a smooth-talking secret agent sent to recover millions in stolen gold. The movie came out in early 1968, and just months later, Tate was murdered. Dean Martin was devastated. He was so heartbroken, he dropped out of the next planned Matt Helm movie and never played the character again. People like to say the series died because of bad reviews or weak box office, but no, it ended because of her. There's also a great little Tarantino touch here. The suits in the Wrecking Crew look a lot like the ones worn by Pitt and company at the end of Inglourious Basterds, and that fight scene between Tate and Nancy Kwan kinda inspired the showdown between Uma Thurman and Daryl Hannah in Kill Bill. This one is huge for Tarantino. He used it as the main visual reference for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He told the entire cast to watch it. And the jacket DiCaprio wears in the opening scene is literally the same jacket Robert Culp wears in this movie. It's a comedy drama about two couples dealing with all the shifting relationship dynamics of the late 60s. Bob and Carol come back from this New Age retreat, all enlightened, trying to bring that energy into their marriage. But then Bob admits to cheating, and things start to unravel, for both couples. Director Paul Mazursky called it his best film. Tarantino talked about how important this movie was when building Once Upon a Time. Sony gave him a list of Columbia films to choose from, and he said this one immediately stood out. He also called it, along with Shampoo, the best sex comedy Hollywood ever made from that era. This is the Sergio Leone epic that basically defined the genre. Tarantino once called it the greatest achievement in the history of cinema. Clint Eastwood, Lee Van Cleef, and Eli Wallach playing three gunslingers chasing after buried Confederate gold in the middle of the Civil War. When Tarantino named his top 3 favorite westerns of all time, this one was right there in second place, just behind Rio Bravo and just ahead of One-Eyed Jacks. And he's talked a lot about how much Sergio Leone influenced him, especially that operatic quality, where the music takes over and the whole thing becomes this big, stylized set piece. He said Leone is probably the single most influential director on his own work, and he pointed out something not a lot of people think about: how Leone made Western heroes sexy. If you think about it, the heroes in the American Westerns, it was always about them being tough and always about them being about the rule of law. Sergio Leone changed that as well. Henry Fonda is said to have come out of Easy Rider a confused man. He had worked in movies for 35 years and made some great ones, and now his son Peter was going to be a millionaire because of a movie Henry couldn't even understand. Tarantino absolutely loves it. He's called it the single greatest example of 60s cinema. Not just because it's a good movie, but because it captures the entire decade. He said, if you had to explain the 60s through film, all you'd need to do is show someone Easy Rider. The movie stars Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper as two bikers crossing America with drug money in their gas tanks. Along the way, it becomes this surreal portrait of hippie culture, communes, drugs, freedom, disillusionment. And it was just as chaotic behind the camera. There was no real script. Most of it was improvised. Hopper and Fonda didn't hire a proper crew. They just picked up people at communes to hold the camera. They were drunk, stoned, high constantly. Jack Nicholson once said that during the campfire scene, he, Hopper, and Fonda went through 155 joints. But somehow, out of all that chaos, they ended up with a film that really meant something. Now this one's kind of a curveball. A Disney family comedy from the 60s about a mischievous cat. Sounds like the kind of thing you'd forget 5 minutes after watching it. But that darn cat is actually way better than the title makes it sound. The plot's ridiculous in the best way. There's this smooth, street-smart cat named DC, who lives with 2 sisters. One day, DC wanders into a garage where a woman's being held hostage by 2 bank robbers. She slips her watch onto his collar, and from there, the whole movie becomes a cat-led manhunt, with the FBI tailing the cat through the suburbs trying to find the crooks. It's not high art, but it's surprisingly fun. There are decent gags, a great animal performance, and it moves at a good clip. And Tarantino actually references it in From Dusk Till Dawn. There's a line where a character says,
I got 6 little friends, and they can all run faster than you can.
That's lifted directly from one of the bank robbers in That Darn Cat. By the late 60s, the spy craze was everywhere. Bond had blown the doors open, and suddenly the screen was flooded with secret agents fighting off evil masterminds. Here, David McCallum plays an undercover narcotics agent hunting down a heroin kingpin in Mexico. The drug lord's played by Telly Savalas, and he's easily the highlight of the whole movie. Tarantino's a huge fan of his, especially in villain roles. Tarantino liked Saul Madrid so much he screened it at his own film festival in Austin back in '99. It's got that fast-paced 60s crime energy, breezes by in 90 minutes, but it's got style, double crosses, shady characters, the whole deal. Behind the scenes, there was some drama. Originally, John Cassavetes was supposed to be in the movie, but production was delayed after he got sick. Or at least that's what the studio said at the time. Later reports say he might have just walked off the project entirely. Either way, he was replaced by Rip Torn. Two giant monsters, one good, one evil, locked in a brutal showdown after escaping from a lab experiment gone wrong. The movie opens with mysterious attacks on civilians, and of course, the authorities pin it on a single creature. But turns out there are two of them, and they go head-to-head in a full-on monster brawl. Over the years, The War of the Gargantuas has become a legit cult classic. Brad Pitt loves it. Guillermo del Toro called it one of his top 5 kaiju movies. Tim Burton's a fan too. And Tarantino referenced it directly in Kill Bill. He literally referred to that fight between the bride and El Driver as the War of the Blonde Gargantuas. Tarantino's a big fan of early Godzilla movies, but this one really stands out for him. It pits the king of the monsters against a giant mystical moth. Sounds ridiculous, and it is. But that's also the charm. These monsters weren't CGI. They were actors in suits, stomping through miniature cities with surprisingly expressive puppetry. It's clunky, sure, but it works. The designs are bold, iconic, and instantly memorable. Tarantino even talked about potentially directing a Godzilla movie of his own after watching this one. And it's got serious film cred too. It's in the Criterion Collection, which tells you how much it's respected, even outside the kaiju fandom.